So what is this class all about? Well, the folk music that emerged in the 50s and 60s has lasted a long time and will probably last a lot longer. Why? Because the confluence of people, politics, and social awareness that came out of the post-war era and ushered in a new age of enlightenment. This course that I'm going to teach on Wednesdays will examine the soundtrack of that period and how folk music was not only key to this movement, but how it became integrated into the larger world of popular music. Now, folk music is a huge subject, so I'm going to try to simplify it and concentrate it on one theme. And the theme is that there's two parallel paths in 20th century American folk music. The first one was the black slave songs that came up from the South and was, started with rural blues and became Dixieland and jazz and urban blues and rhythm and blues and finally rock and roll. The second parallel path was that white, rural, Appalachian, Tennessee River Valley and Point South rural music that was string-based that became country and bluegrass music. So what happened? Both of these paths of music featured political and social protest, pleas for change in the lyrics. Both began as isolated, and together they became accessible and very popular, and both ultimately, being the music of the common folks, triggered and created the folk music revival of the 60s. So what happens in my class, for those of you who've been in it, this is a little repetition, but for those of you who haven't, what I do is I do a lecture with a slideshow that has photographs and captions and information about the period and the people. I also play many audio CDs of these artists, maybe 8 to 10 a class. I show 3 or 4 select video clips from documentaries that I've culled through many to get the ones that work best for that week. And I also have a live music component where I play guitar and I play the piano and sing. And I have some very special guests coming this particular fall semester for the folk music thing. So what's happening each week? Week 1 is kind of the background. I talk about Leadbelly and Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger and the groups he was in, and people like Cisco Houston and Josh White and Harry Belafonte in the 50s that kind of blazed a path and, a way for folk music to come in. Week 2, I talk about Bob Dylan, the bard, comes from the North Country, and Joan Baez. Week 3, we get into the people in the Greenwich Village scene like Dave Van Ronk and Phil Oakes, the late great Phil Oakes, and Eric Anderson and Judy Collins, people who started to be singer-songwriters in that period. Week 4 is a really fun week. I talk about all the groups, especially the Kingston Trio and Peter, Paul, and Mary, and several other singing groups during that time that really had a lot to do with making folk music popular and accessible to mainstream America. Week 5 is called Gone But Not Forgotten, where I take a select number of people who have passed away who made a huge impact on folk music, such as Fred Neil, John Stewart, Tim Hardin, Tim Buckley. And what I do is I talk about how these people were great singers and they moved to folk music a little bit away from politics and into more folk rock and popular music. And the 6th week is simply called the Canadian Connection. Gordon Lightfoot, Ian Sylvia, Joni Mitchell, Leonard Cohen, and a couple of people from Canada. Finally, what is my hope and expectation for this class? Well, I have many, but I think the main one is to reignite the emotional connection that many of us have with this popular and uniquely American music that has influenced so many lives. So I hope to see many of you out there. Thank you.